No one comes back to open the door. No one. A strange sensation. But I guess that's how life often lacks animation. Somewhat numb. A little bit past tense. As if belonging to another season. Yesterday life. Not that I would, under normal circumstances, but lately, perhaps after all, perhaps I, one needs to appreciate the small things, life's small things. But whose life? And who is to determine what a small or a big thing in life is? Are things for free smaller than things that come with a price? Luxury goods, they are often quite small, but, except maybe for yachts and mansions, but they are a little bit useful, so they are not really luxury. But it's interesting to observe how luxury goods almost exclusively entertain a very prominent position regarding secondary markets. One would think it would be somewhat more, to obtain something that the very moment when you hold it in your hand, that its value decreases like in a flash. Like fireworks. And then 30 seconds later, boink, it's all gone. In comparison to a diamond necklace or search for an exclusive appartement, a luxury condo that the real estate broker have convinced you repetitively that it's going to double its value in a couple of months. On the other hand, luxury doesn't really go together with spectacle. It needs to be practiced with a certain kind of je ne sais quoi. Kind of a presence merged with a form of anonymity. Standing out yet withdrawn. Things for free tend to attract less attention. And is that what makes them small? But somewhere it appears to flip. Like a gift, after all, is for free. But can envelope a lot of value. I mean, for the one who offers it to obtain it, can be connected to strong efforts and even sacrifices. But at the same time, those efforts, those values must be left behind, dissolved, the moment when the gift is passed over. A gift cannot be associated with assumed gratitude or some form of revenue. But also for the one receiving the gift, it mustn't come with a oh, but that is, how did you know that is exactly what I needed? Or that is way too much, you really shouldn't have. It is first when the person and the gift starts to form a relation, when something value is being. Children is maybe the best and the worst example. They are, after all, for free, and production value is rather low, if one says so. And they are also, as one says, the biggest gift life can offer. And they don't come with a return policy exactly. It doesn't seem to matter how many neither. It's not like practice. It's not a practice, how can one say? It's not like practice decreases the uniqueness of either of them. Maybe size, small or big, have something to do with duration. The wristwatch the son inherits from his father, who inherited it from yet another generation, gently whispering about commitment and loyalty, duration, and at the same time holding and presenting life's lack of permanence. The wristwatch is a small, big thing, and a big, small thing both saturated in forms of somewhat questionable morals, but also communicating something about continuity and maybe even trust. Never a middle-sized thing, if you know. At some points, rather comme il faut. But nowadays, who keeps a job for several decades? Perhaps we have forgotten certain things about loyalty. Or maybe we live in a society that has developed into something where with which developed into something that has no compatibility with commitment. Or maybe it's just capitalism that has grown so greedy it can't even offer us frequent flyer card holders a little something for the touchdown. She gave me a kiss. A kiss can be a small thing, but a certain one can change the paths of lives. And after that first one, we simply couldn't stop. At the same time, still it's that first one that pays the bills for all the one that follows. But then at some point they faded. Maybe we got bored. We stopped. Perhaps we got so self-conscious, fear of possible bad breath. But I wonder what happens with the kiss then. Will they end up in the form of malign inflation, or does the rare kiss still exchanged grow exponentially in value to become something really, really big? We remember our first, maybe not the really first, but maybe we remember several first kisses. That one behind that one was really surprising. I really didn't see that coming. And then that one. The one that I had longed for. The one that I had waited for so long. One or two perhaps a little bit disappointing, but mostly due to oversized expectations and a little bit of too vivid fantasizing in advance. And then that one. That wasn't especially deep. That weren't particularly long. That one. That changed everything. God welcomes us all, his house is open for everybody, and on the door there's a big sign saying "Tout est gratuit." There's no entrance fee. And then you're supposed to cultivate your relationship with God. But isn't it a bit peculiar that at the same time that it's for free, we have a tendency to be annoyed, irritating, maybe even pissed off when he or she or they, when they don't appreciate our prayers, when we don't feel heard, or when we experience that we are not being seen. But how can we, when it's for free, how do we expect some form of remuneration, some kind of payback? Or I mean, it's not exactly rocket science that there's no interest rate in for free, and everybody knows that a Luna Park with a fat entrance fee, the Ferris wheel will be bigger, and the haunted house more high-tech. But when it comes to God, it seems like we overlook that slight predicament. For free. But does that mean that your relationship with God is a small thing? A small relation with a big thing? Maybe it could have been the other way around. We learn in school and so on when we are small that God is big, and after all he created a whole shebang. But then maybe it would be better if it was a big relationship with a small thing, and that it's like our commitment, our devotion that carries the little thing forward, that brings it into its future and holds its energies. Makes it sparkle, so to say. I can wait. I can wait. She asked me to hold her hand. It must have been towards the end of May. As a request, a small thing, but not for who? For the one being asked, it might mean close to nothing. Of course you can, why not? Just give it a try. It's for free. But for the one asking, it might be connected to a lot of efforts to overcome shyness or to muster the courage of making oneself face possible rejection. And evidently the response can change the paths of two lives to come. A child who slips its hand into mine, something small, done with innocence, and without at the same time, each and every time, something immeasurable, as a gesture, something so minor, almost imperceptible, but as a gift, something so very, very big. And something that I must take on without even the slightest reflection vis-a-vis responsibility or morals. But I can wait. I can wait. At the end of the fence. Nor responsibility nor morals can wait. They are in fact really useless when it comes to waiting. They're perhaps even the very opposite of exactly that. But I can wait. I can wait at the end of the fence. I can. Is waiting a small or a big thing? For the bus, it's usually not very long, but it can be a very big thing. For love, we can wait forever, but it mustn't be a big thing. It can't be felt, can't be experienced as an effort, especially not a big one. I mean, if it's love, and it can't really be an effort. And if it feels like one, maybe it's nothing else than a bus that's really delayed. But what happens with that time of waiting does it change in size, or what happens then when he or she or they return? Does it still, or is it more like, oops, that was that, let's move on? When the person coming home, the one that has been waited for, oh, you've been waiting for me. As if the waiting was an effort to overcome, as if waiting was a evidence for a form of endurance, and thus waiting turned into something almost like competitive. Yeah. No, only a year and a half, but that's hardly nothing. Perhaps anticipation plays a role here too. And then there she or he is. But what is that waiting then? And until your return, I have counted the days, the hours, even minutes. I have with closed eyes lain sleepless, wondering, longing, worrying and fantasizing about, imagining how the moment when we will be reunited. But what happens with that waiting now? Now, what happens with those feelings and those emotions? Now, they must be nothing now when you are back. They can have no value. They can have no value now when you are back. Still, when you were away, the waiting and anticipation of your return was the only thing I had. Waiting was what kept me alive. Waiting somehow resonates of passivity. Waiting is by definition, maybe not exactly definition, but waiting is a little bit by definition the opposite of suspense. Suspense is when time is postponed, undulating and crisscrossed with rivers and creeks and canyons and pathways, when time is bumpy, interlaced, and dry, cracked like dry earth after an extensive drought, and every moment is charged. That's suspense. Waiting has none of those elaborations, no gaps to jump, no intervals to overcome. No, it's not that waiting is out of focus, au contraire, not at all. No, all dials are meticulously calibrated and technologies are sharp There are just no details, nothing that occupies. Maybe that's why people tend to have a cigarette when they are waiting for the bus. The cigarette as a way to reinstall details. The cigarette, the smoking, but maybe actually is a certain, is a kind of disavowal. Smoking as a method to substitute the lack of details with manufactured ones, even though knowing that that's the very function of the cigarette. But are details obstacles or assets? Is something with a lot of details big, or are details something that keeps something being small? That's a detail we really don't need. But are any details necessary? Or are they the details are they a means to ensure that possibilities are still at hand? Details is a means to postpone permanence. There's definitely a difference in between voluntary and involuntary waiting. And one of those days when maybe you're not exactly at your very, very best, and the person who at some point waited for you says with a gentle and soothing voice, but after all the time that I was waiting for you, how could you? What do you do with such a sentence that you can not stop waiting for, and at the same time hope to postpone it indefinitely? I don't know, but perhaps involuntary waiting is the same as grief. Or perhaps grief is that specific form of involuntary waiting when you cannot stop waiting, although you know that the waiting will never come to an end. Grief is waiting without a destination. Grief is life in which details has been veiled. You can still sense them, but as if through a haze. You can still hold them, but as if you're wearing really, really thick winter gloves. Ghost details, perhaps. For every moment lived, an amount of futures are subtracted. To come to terms with aging means to befriend and welcome the inevitability that at some or other time you will run out of futures. It's a beautiful thing to think about. Oops. My stack of futures just came to an end. I just turned the last page of my book of futures, and it is time for me to say, I stay put here and hold the fort, and you move on. You have futures to pursue. But what happens to the futures that are left unlived? What happens to the futures of those who died prematurely? Maybe what we call ghosts. Are the leftover futures of all those who weren't given the opportunity to see their stack come to that end. But there's one thing that can't be allowed, even if asked really kindly. One thing that must not be allowed, and that is, even if I asked very, very kindly. And that is to be granted a permission to skip over a part of the futures that we have been assigned, even if I asked kindly so many times. To impatience, I guess, precedes the moment of coming to terms with the fact that your futures are not infinite. The moment on the phone with who knows who. But when are you coming? Oh, it's not long now. I'll be there in 2 days. And the person on the other end of the line, but I can't wait. I really can't wait. What a strange thing to say. I mean, it feels good, but it varies. And in a way, you ought to. Still, everybody knows you can wait. It's not that you're going to die or disintegrate. And if you did die, then waiting would be in vain in the first place. So, of course you can wait. And actually, it mustn't and it can't be anything else than a delight. Because what you're waiting for is an extraordinary something or somebody. But if you don't, then it's as if you don't care. So an intricate twist. Moments when waiting grows and grows and grows and outgrows big. When you are waiting for the outcome of let's say a job interview or perhaps the result of medical tests. When waiting becomes so painful that even a negative outcome is a relief. At least now I know. Or when you're waiting for a crush to show up at a date. In seconds, waiting transformed into awkward silences and now what? Odd conversations, and finding oneself ending up with a really wrong topic. Oops. It's nothing personal. But I think I'd prefer if you were a little bit more late. Because until you showed up, you and I, we were perfect. I can wait. I can wait. there at the end of the fence. We remember the first, but I wonder, will I remember the last? The last kiss. I wish life will grant me that opportunity, that the distance or the journey between my last kiss and my last breath will not be long enough to get lost. That the time between that last intimacy and my demise will not be long enough to exceed the limits of remembrance. We say she survived her husband with 20 years. But do we also then say she endured life for 20 years without the joy and without that little sense of pride of placing a kiss on the lips of the person she loved, or for that matter, to sense that moment of surrender that makes the kiss be something more than a simple transaction between two individuals. It's not going to be long now. I'll be there in 2 days. But I want it to be long, because waiting for you fills me with a gentle glow. It makes me feel like freshly brushed teeth all day long. It's when I don't know when you will return that I suffer. And sometimes I remain in that state as a form of whispering masochism. Was maybe not the wording that I was looking for, but the peculiar enjoyment of deliberately subjecting oneself to doubt. In the little village in which I grew up, not different from many other societies, practicing forms of Christian moral. Grief is something carried by the individual. We go through life together, but when it comes to grief, you're on your own. I'm certainly no expert, but isn't it a little bit unfair or somehow stingy that the very last thing we do, the very last thing, and then we are supposed to appear in court to be judged and evaluated by God? One would think that a generous God would forgive and forget. Maybe actually not forgive, but simply forget. Forget in a cheeky, sort of under the eye way. I know that you know that I know, but I will still forget. Because to an engagement in forgiving is still to acknowledge that something might not have been exactly as desired or up to standards. The father or the parent who will offer the son or the child, maybe not a little, but more of a grown-up child, but still it doesn't exactly matter, who would offer the kid a loan, even though possessing the assets and having no intention of using them. And then especially when in connection with a comment, you have to make yourself worthy. And especially at the very end of life, that the last thing we do, you have to make yourself worthy. But how is it that one says, you learn, you learn from your mistakes? I don't like. But maybe it's not so much worse than, or maybe it's exactly equally, or even, who knows. Like, you learn from the things you forgive. You learn from the things that you forgive. I will. But first I need you to acknowledge that you did me wrong. Then maybe. Or, I will, but only after I have seen you suffer the consequences of your actions. To forgive is still an engagement with power and domination. People that are proud of their ability to forgive, that swim in the self-righteous appearance of forgiveness, rectification. What an awful notion, and so deeply proprietary. Even if forgiveness happens in between people behind a closed door or whatnot. Forgiveness is not something that you give or receive, as in, can you pass me the salt? Forgiveness is is a moment of stepping away, or taking distance to one's proprietary self, to that compartmentalized I that says mine, that owns. I can wait. I can wait. To forgive is not something that we do in between each other. It is a form of practice of a commons. Forgiveness maybe until, say, 1776. But after that, I think, since then, forgiveness has been on the Trans-Siberian capitalism, and the ETA has been postponed indefinitely. And somehow, even before finding its coach, it swapped forgive for transaction. The terrifying moment when forgive speaks, and by the way, what's in it for me? As if forgiveness was a good deal. I need closure. Well, is another of those American inventions. Who came up with that? What kind of an awful type therapist? I need closure before I can. It's a very, very peculiar reliance on reason. First, I need to understand. I need to be able to causally follow step by step, and then I might be able to. It's a very regulatory, repressive understanding of loss and trauma and grief. There are no other options than let's put that behind us. Let's package that up and place it in that part of the basement called erosion. No, there must be other options. Can there be forms of coexistence? Can there be a landscape in which hurt and joy, past and present, can coexist in order to generate a rich and complex now? Where it's not a matter of putting behind, making moving on easy. But instead, life as a form of sharing, in which sharing is not an agreement, but alongside and being with. I can wait. I can wait. Forgetting is not simple. It's because it cannot be active. It needs to be a practice of that doesn't have determination. And in ways, it's much more complex than forgetting. That is much more complex than forgiving. Because forgiving implies a transaction. Forgiving means to come to an end, to stop. Whereas forgetting is an engagement with movement, a concentric movement through which words, utterances, forms of exchange, tensions, and so on end up further and further away until the moment when semiotic coherence is lost. Forgetting needs to happen in 2 steps. First you need to forget, and then you need to forget. And it is first after the second forgetting, when you have forgotten what you have forgotten, that I free myself from forms of exchange of guilt. But I can wait. I can wait at the end of the fence. Once I told an acquaintance, not really a friend, this story about a guy who had a child in the same kindergarten as me. I can't remember the context or why, but must have been at a party. But already before getting halfway, the acquaintance sort of stepped up to me and almost screamed in my face, "Yeah, he was just looking for attention." And then she made sure to let me know that the guy, she might even have called him the dude. He was a loser, and so was I, who had subjected her to that mediocre anecdote. I didn't say anything more. Not because I didn't want to, but she had already started to talk with somebody else about something that apparently was much more exciting. So the guy, in any case, an ordinary person, you know the character, the type in creative industries or something like this. Sometimes when picking up his kid, he showed up in this type of fluorescent jacket, you know, kind of jacket that city cleaners and garbage handlers are obliged to use. Sort of too orange or or some other unidentifiable color, if color is even something that one can use for such things. And of course, attention was obviously the first reaction. How could it not? It's rather evident, but somehow, little by little, this man, he made me understand. He didn't really inform me, and there was no real conversation, but he allowed me to understand that for him, the situation was altogether different. One can understand this as a privilege, but for him there was something very specific and very, very precise. For him, the jacket offered him an opportunity to become, in ways, invisible. from the moment when he put on the jacket, everything was about the jacket. And he, even if it was the right size, he completely disappeared inside it. So for him, the jacket, and it offered him a form of anonymity. Not with the dark side of anonymity, but I mean, he could still pick up his child, but something was different. It was not. It was as if he was a person without content. A human, whichever human. Just human. But I wonder, I can say a lot of things about the jacket, and of course he was a guy. For women the situation is evidently very, very different. But I wonder, is anonymity a small or a big thing? The conventional understanding, I guess, is that anonymity is a form of subtraction, but you know, that something is taken away and so on. Maybe for Freud it could be understood as a lack. Maybe it's all Mark's fault, you know. At home, after hours, spending time in nature, you're a person and you have agency vis-a-vis your personality. Whereas at work, you're alienated and you're just one of endless, interchangeable, anonymous workers. But perhaps anonymity could also be considered as the moment just before possibility. I mean, in the sense of being identified as either possibly this or possibly that. So that anonymity is a moment of living all possibilities and impossibilities at the same time, all the time, but without continuity and without any relation to, without making a decision. So that anonymity is like the calm before the storm. It's like the moment just before something has started to pick up speed. So neither explosion nor implosion. It's without prefix, it's just plosion. When something becomes possible, necessity is crossed out. Possibility is not necessary. It's exactly possibly this or possibly that. Anonymity, however weird it might sound, is to become necessary, but not necessary this or necessary that, but necessary, whichever necessary, so just necessary. But is anonymity bigger or smaller than possibility? Because Mistake. Just necessary. I can wait. I can wait. At the end of the fence. Possibility. Possibly this or possibly that, because possibility doesn't end. It goes on, it perpetuates on and on. Possibility, therefore, prohibits oneself or something to become a real. Possibility is the absence of being genuine. Anonymity, however, means exactly to become real, to become authentic. Maybe that's why we, or at least I, somehow fear a little bit city cleaners and garbage handlers, because anonymity doesn't deal with possibilities, doesn't offer a choice, it's not the proposition. And therefore, the encounter of an anonymity, because it doesn't confirm me, is haunting in regard to that it's a preview of my own possible becoming anonymous, my own possible erasure. But anonymity has nothing to do with being erased. It's, on the contrary, it's a becoming complete, it's like becoming fully completed and completely full. And without having to make a decision, especially not in relation to something or somebody. But is possibility bigger or smaller than anonymity? Some say we don't choose love, but it's the other way around. Love chooses us. Maybe since I didn't make the decision, this or that. To love isn't a matter of possibility. Because if I didn't choose, then love cannot not be necessary. To love is to simultaneously experience one's fear and bliss of becoming anonymous. Love has no reasons, only necessity. So when I say I love you, I'm given a moment, maybe just a small moment. I'm given an interval vis-a-vis possibility. It's pretty remarkable, isn't it, that to love, maybe the most personal thing we humans do, at the same time doesn't and can't belong to us. To love the I who loves you is and isn't at the same time me, completely me and fully not at the same time, all the time. I mean, if I had reasons to love you, wouldn't that be a little bit melancholic and disappointing? I love you as long as you don't color your hair red or show up with your pet turtle or something. No, love have no reasons. It reflects only itself. I love you because I love you. And as long as I do, it can only be because. I love you because. And as long as I do because, love is real, necessary, and perhaps even objective. And if love isn't my choice and can't be, love can't be private. To love is to hand in oneself and become available. To love is a practice of being public. Does something become more true if expressed with a loud voice? My dad used to say, especially in the car, let's speak lowercase. No screaming, just tiny letters. Or does a truth become stronger more true when expressed through a whisper? Everybody knows that a secret is more secret when whispered in somebody's ear. No, a truth is true no matter what, and cannot be dependent on volume. So why holler when a whisper is more than enough? A truth is necessary and has nothing to do with possibility. A truth doesn't belong to anybody, not even to us. Truth is independent of us. It has nothing to do with us humans or our lives, small or big. But if truth is necessary and has nothing to do with possibility, and love is necessary and have nothing to do with possibility, if truth is necessary and love is necessary, does that not mean that love is true? I can wait. I can wait. At the end of the fence. When active, time becomes about something and not itself. Activity is time's forgetting itself. Waiting, time without activity, isn't then waiting similar to the experience of time itself. Waiting is time turned on itself, time made self-referential. Waiting is the experience of time itself, the experience of objective time. But maybe it can also be the other way around, that waiting is when time becomes properly subjective, when waiting is experience, an empty, pure experience. Properly subjective because waiting has no relations to anything or anybody. But then the cigarette becomes a way of giving waiting a relation, and waiting becomes easy to overcome. But if waiting is objective, no cigarette is required, because anxious anticipation withers away in favor of a stretch of contemplation, a moment of indifference, of becoming anonymous. I can wait. I can wait. And no one can show me the way. There's no doorman. And no one comes to open. But perhaps it is already open. It's just that we have grown so accustomed to there being doors that we have forgotten that openness and being open are two entirely different things. Openness, as much as forgiveness, after all, are looked after, whereas being open is to share dressing room with forgetting. When we hold hands, even just casually on the street, does it necessarily have to communicate belonging and signify mutual confirmation through which together is strong? Perhaps holding hands can function or even exist as a means to stand together, however little we have in common, even if that in common is just being human. Even though I don't know your name, or maybe especially because I don't, we can hold hands open without forming bonds. To hold hands, to offer one's hand, or to ask for one's hand to be held, is to give oneself up to surrender and depart from transaction. To allow oneself to spend time with that form of forgetting that we call hope. And there's no details. Nothing that holds us together or keep us apart. There at the end of the fence. I can wait. I can wait. And things are what they are, which is far from anything anonymous. Perhaps even it is one of those moments, that can't be produced, that can't be forced, and yet, exactly because it can't, are necessary.